Thanks for coming out today. I'm Sean Belber, and this is
Sally Rossi Orman.
and we're delighted. We're delighted to be here. We would be more delighted without our masks. We've been more delighted to have you here joining us on a beautiful May day. We have waited all winter, planning, ordering seeds, thinking about what we want to grow. We've been waiting all spring, a cold, cool spring with snow in May, and waiting for plants to be ready. We feel with Memorial Day in New England happening early-ish on Monday, we're ready to plant and teach and talk about tomato plants. So as I mentioned, I'm John Belber, joined by Sally, and we are farm teachers here at Holly Hill Farm. We love to lead students, kids, children, adults around this bucolic, organic, vegetable, flower, and herb farm. We like to take guided walks into the woods. We look to show what's happening in the field in terms of diversity with tomatoes and lettuces and garlic and carrots and all these different crops that we are able to grow here. Since late February, we've been growing seeds and seedlings in our greenhouse. And many of you have been so kind to have interest in those seeds and seedlings because you want to plant too. And you're excited to use this time of isolation and distancing to maybe get outside safely, carefully. Remember the planting that happened maybe when you were a kid or in grandma or grandpa's yard. Maybe you're excited to learn about how plants grow, how to avoid mildew, one of the questions I heard asked, how to make sure to keep chipmunks and woodchucks out of our garden. We don't have all the answers here at Holly Hill Farm, but we have experience and we have interest in helping you because we're growers and gardeners too. Every farm teacher here, every farmer who works here is working and learning and trying to figure out what is the best way to care for our soil, to give back to our soil, and to have a place and a space for our plants to grow. Today, in the second installment of Ask Johnny at the Farm, I'm so lucky to be joined by Sally so that we can talk together about transplanting tomatoes. Tomatoes is a divine New England treat. If you imagine a BLT or you imagine a tomato salad in late July or August or into September as the days start to wane, it is a long, wonderful crop that, as I said, gets started in March here at the farm and is babied and pampered and cared for inside the greenhouse, where the temperature, we try to control the temperature. We try to watch the maturation. They start in seed trays, these little tiny tomato seeds. They grow into seedlings. They eventually are carefully up potted into a slightly bigger pot and then had a chance to continue to expand their root base and continue to grow up with their strong but fragile stem, if that's possible, their true leaves, and then their cotyledons and their true leaves growing into a wonderful plant that will bear fruit. There are cherry tomatoes. There are pear-shaped tomatoes. There are small tomatoes. There are big tomatoes. There are big boy, big beef tomatoes that we grow. We grow probably over 20 varieties of tomatoes. Many of them are heirloom or organic, and we're just trying to really find the best way to grow these tomatoes and get them to our customers. And all of you who joined today and others who placed orders, you're being so patient as we are trying to get ready to get these tomatoes out to you. So we're going to talk today about, now that we have a tomato plant or two, a couple different kinds that we have, how can we transplant them into a garden setting or into a container? And Sally's going to help lead. I'm going to continue to get this bed ready. This is a beautifully turned bed that has sat quiet all winter. A lot of leaves on top. Even some manure was in there that's now decomposed and ready to enrich our soil bed. So I'm going to continue to get my hands in the soil here, babe.
That's what you do best, Johnny. So again, I'm Sally, and I'm one of the farm educators here, and I have a little bit of a science background, so that's why they call me into these things. First of all, there's about 7,500 different varieties of tomatoes in the world, and tomatoes are actually indigenous to the Americas. They found that the Aztecs were actually farming or growing tomatoes back in 700 AD. So it originated in Peru, Bolivia, and all that sort of area, and started to migrate up to the North America area as people migrated up. tomatoes ended up being one of the exports that the colonists did back over to Europe, because it was growing here for a while and they were using it. And it had a mixed review in Europe. In the southern part, in Italy and that sort of thing, it was very well welcomed and turned into tomato sauce and pizza and that sort of thing. Northern and Britain and all that area, tomatoes were considered poisonous. And it really turned out to be the reason why they likened it to poison was that in Britain at the time, they used to eat and cook in pewter plates and such, which has a lead content to it. So tomatoes are very acidic, would leach the lead out of the plates and poison people with it. So it was the peasants down in Italy and that sort of southern Europe that ate off of wooden plates that just, basically made this come true. Now, in America, it came up, started becoming popular about in the 1800s. And soon was the belle of the kitchen, as they say, because it was so well loved and used. So that's kind of the background of tomatoes. Now, if you're interested in growing tomatoes, first thing you got to ask is, what kind of tomatoes do you like to eat? Do you like the big fat ones that Johnny was talking about, the slicers that go in a sandwich? Do you like the little round ones that are cut up nicely for a salad? Or maybe you like the little tiny grape ones, the little cherry ones, just for a snack. So depending on what kind of tomato you enjoy, perhaps you want to have a paste tomato because you like to make sauce. So there's all different kinds of varieties. And as Johnny said, we have about 22 or more varieties that we sell here on the farm. Now, when you first decide what kind you want, then you got to decide how you're going to grow it. And there's two different growing types. One is called the determinate, which definitely means it only grows to a certain height and it stops. The last flower on the top starts to get pollinated. The whole plant starts to pollinate. So they tend to be a little bit smaller. They're also very good for pots because they don't grow as large as the other variety, which is the indeterminate. So the determinate are more like bushes. A lot of times I use a cage around mine because I want to hold it in. And it has a finite time that it starts to grow and starts to flower, and then kind of the tomatoes all sort of kind of come in at the same time. The second type is the indeterminate, which is more like a vine. It grows and continuously grows until the frost. So it's constantly putting out little flowers and getting fertilized and putting up the tomatoes and such, and it will continue to do that. And some of those varieties can actually grow about 12 feet or more. So there's a lot of balance and strengthening with stakes and such with that type, maybe roping off and such. There's actually a third type too, which is kind of in between. They're called a vigorous determinate, which means it will stop its growing like the determinate, but then there'll still be some stuff that keeps coming off. It's not as fruitful in the end, but it will continue to grow. So you have two different types in their growth patterns, whether they're bushy or whether they're vinish. And a lot of the little grape tomatoes and that sort of thing, cherry tomatoes can be grapish as well. So I know a lot of you have questions about the different types, but also how do you actually plant these things, right? So, and how do you take care of them?
And when
And
you plant it?
Well, one of the reasons we can plant today is because the soil is warm enough. Now, a lot of people get tempted to put their tomatoes out because it's time, because they're feeling like it's time to put it outside. It's May or whatever. But what determines whether a plant is going to be growing vigorously or not has a lot to do with soil temperature, not so much air temperature. So if you put your tomatoes out 2 weeks ago, they didn't get bitten by frost and stop growing, but they did stop growing because they were shocked by the cold. The cold interferes with the absorption of the nutrients in the soil. So it just stops and hunkers down until it's warm enough. So soil temperature should be easily above 55 degrees before you start to plant these.
And last week we had temperatures dip down at night to 38,
Right.
40 degrees here on the coast, and
And
that's no good for tomato
it
plants.
doesn't kill them, but it just stops them. And that does that to a lot of other warm weather plants as well. So they want to be, they're warm weather plants, so they want to be warm.
From the roots down on up, yeah.
So soil temperature determines when you can plant. And we're assuming that it's in the sunshine right now. This has been warming up. Another thing that we can talk about is what else affects the tomatoes from growing. Might be also how and where you plant them. Okay, so warm weather plants like this, tomato needs at least, and I'm saying at least, 8 hours of sunshine, warm sunshine a day. Again, that's how it's going to activate its enzymes and growth enzymes in its roots and such. That's how it's going to activate that warmth mixed with water. It's going to activate all the microbes and the fungus that are in the soil that help the plants grow. So it's about warmth and sunshine.
And these tomatoes that we're asking to grow, I talked about harvesting in July or August into September. We're asking a lot of this tomato plant. If it started in March, keep going. April, don't get stunted. May, June, July, August, September, maybe into October. A late October frost is likely. That's 7 months. We're asking a lot of the soil to nutrify and to energize that plant for those 7 months and to bear fruit. And it's essential. Not only do we have warm soil, but good, healthy soil too.
You know, something that I was just thinking about when Johnny was talking about the different kinds of tomatoes. When we talk about heirloom tomatoes, what are heirloom tomatoes? Well, heirloom tomatoes basically have not been altered or changed in their original form. So, and they're considered heirloom if they've been around for 50 years or more. And heirloom tomatoes are delicious and juicy and all that, but they tend to have problems with plant disease, blights and fungus and stuff, because they haven't been raised to fight that. And so, so heirloom tomatoes have a history to them. A lot of times generationally, they've been handed down as prized possessions, the seeds of the heirloom tomatoes. There's also the type that we're most familiar with, that most of us, if you're gonna go grab a seed packet or something, those are hybrid tomatoes. Those are the ones we see in the supermarkets and stuff. And they've been bred to be able to have a thicker skin, because heirloom tends to have a little thinner skin. So they'll hold up better in shipping and transportation primarily. And also they can breed them to be resistant to these plant diseases that we'll talk about in a little bit, the funguses and the molds and such that can be on the plant. There's also genetically modified organisms. Now, there's none on the market right now. You cannot go out and buy a genetically modified tomato, thank God. But I actually worked on one 30 years ago in a company called Calgene, and they were actually trying to modify the shape of the tomato to be more square so they could pack more in a box than a round tomato.
In a lab, yep,
right?
Controlled environment.
And they're also, they breed them for more resistance to different diseases, and also maybe even program a little bit more of, not doing the private programming, like a food value to it, maybe a higher vitamin C content or something. Right now, like I said, there are no GMO tomatoes on the market, and hopefully there won't be, because I like my food real. Anyways, so those are the 3 different kinds that you might run across, and the varieties that we talked about. I'm just using my cheat sheets, okay.
Do we sell any of the, what did you call it, the hardy determinant? What was the vigorous determinant?
I think there is, yeah, there is a couple of vigorous determinant.
Okay.
In fact, let me just see what my examples are, my cheat sheet.
And folks who are kindly purchasing or interested in purchasing, we're continuing to update our shopping platform. We have incredible people behind the scenes working on store.hollyhillfarm.org. It's a Shopify platform that allows you to shop or to peruse and to fulfill your carts and figure out what it is that you'd like to buy. And patience is a wonderful aspect of this shopping experience. In this world, we've adopted this way of ordering plants, and your patience is wonderful, because if you see things run out, well, we often will try to replenish. We have plants, and then we have backstock, and then we have new seeds that are being grown. So store.hollyhillfarm.org. Thank you, Liza. It's a great way to keep looking to see, is there a plant that I might have missed that I'd like to get? What does it mean, all these different kinds of cherry tomatoes? What does it mean, all these heirlooms? You can look. There are pictures and descriptions as you get set to buy.
So
More native plants coming soon, by the way.
Excellent.
Thank you, Liza.
So Janice asked what type is a vigorous determinant, and there's a couple that we sell. They're the Roma and a Celebrity.
Oh, good
So
to know.
again, they're going to
Okay.
start off bushy. They might have some little tendrils near the end and such, but they're not going to get 12 feet tall. They're not going to continue to grow until
Okay.
the end of the frost
Excellent.
and such.
Good to know.
So just to let you know about that. Let's see. So shall we get to,
Determinant?
well, we shall get to, planting. So what do tomatoes need to plant besides soil? That's nice and warm. It needs to be a special kind of soil. It needs to be a beautiful, rich, loamy, composted soil.
And we
Tomatoes-
have that, yeah, and we have that here in our garden bed. We also have it, we've sort of imported it into our containers too.
Right. Tomatoes are, they suck up a lot of vitamins and nutrients and minerals from the soil. So you got to give it to them.
Can I interrupt? There's a
Yes.
phrase that people might not be familiar with. If you're new to this, there's a phrase you might see about tomatoes that they are heavy feeders.
Right.
And that's what Sally is talking about. It means that they need a lot of nutrients from the soil. It asks a lot of a soil to be in the ground for however many months.
7 months. And those feeders are the root systems down in the ground,
Right.
establishing, reaching, looking to feed that plant. So that's a great explanation.
So how do you figure out what kind of soil you got, right? So people do home testing, but you also could do it visually. You could scoop up a big chunk of whatever you're going to be thinking you're planting, where you're planting, put it in a bottle, a jar with water, and shake it vigorously and let it settle. And in that jar of water, you should have a really good thick top layer of composted material because it will float. And then you'll have a dark band of layer that is more organic material, but it's heavier. And then you'll have little layers of sand and rock and clay. Now, soil that is really clayish, which is what we're familiar with around here in New England, doesn't let soil drain. So you have to add sand and such to it so that there will be little spaces so that it can actually drain. Clay,
Good porosity.
porosity. And on the other hand, you don't want sandy soil because when you water or when it rains, the water flows through it too fast and takes all the water soluble nutrients with it. So you need a nice, rich, loamy soil, compost, manure, home compost, anything, leaf mulch, anything that's going to give it space in the soil and also act as a sponge. That's really what compost helps soil do. It's a conditioner, like when you put conditioner in your hair, right? So it's a soil conditioner that helps to hold moisture in place and hold moisture in place long enough so that the roots and the little filaments that come off the roots have the time to be able to absorb the nutrients. So again, if they're sitting in a bunch of water, they drown. They can't get the nutrients, even if the water's there, there's not gonna be any nutrients in it. If it's too sandy and they dry out, and then those little roots are standing there going, I can't eat anything. So it has to be this nice, rich, balanced, you really can't overdo compost in a lot of ways, unless you're planting in pure compost.
And we're fortunate. We're here at the Education Garden here at Holly Hill Farm, this wonderful organic farm owned by Gene White and members of the White family and the friends. Is happy to be working and growing and farming here. Wish we had the Wi-Fi to take you down to the growing fields where the farmers already have some tomatoes in the ground under a greenhouse, because that warm environment is encouraging to those tomatoes they've already transplanted. But here in this education garden, as you might have at home in a garden bed, you might think, I'm going to put the tomatoes in the same place every year because that's what I do, and that's perhaps what my father and my grandpa did, or my grandma and my grandmother did. And that is taking a chance because of the fact that these are heavy feeders, to borrow Janice's phrase. You could do it. It does depend on how much you're able to enrich that soil. So we can encourage crop rotation, even on a home gardening level, if possible. Last year, there were not tomatoes in this garden bed. They were in a different garden bed. So we like to rotate where our crops go. Try not to put the long, heavy feeder plants in the same place every year. Now, at a home garden, you might not have any choice, which is why Sally is absolutely right in making sure you're adding lots to compost and taking the time to observe, feel and learn about your soil.
You could also have your soil tested through UMass, but unfortunately the soil testing lab is closed right now.
Right.
Right, and you could also get kits from Home Depot and stuff. Very basic kits will tell you the nitrogen content, the phosphorus or phosphate content, or phosphorus, and also the potassium or potash content. And each of those play an integral part in plant development. Nitrogen, to me, is the color green. It is the color, builds the plant structure, and it also encourages the leaf growth and structure of the leaf and the stems. It also helps in the chlorophyll and making a food in the leaves itself. Phosphorus is really important for root development. Again, those roots that you want to get in there, you want to make sure you have enough phosphorus in your soil. It's an energy producer as well, so it actually gives vitality to the plant. And it also helps in fruit development. Another one is potassium or potash, and that strengthens, it's kind of like the immune system to the plant. It gives it strength and resistance to some of these diseases that we will talk about in a little bit. It also gives the color to the fruit and the taste and sugars. There's some other minerals, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, and they also play a big component in soil health, particularly for tomatoes. Calcium gives strength to the walls. You think about calcium in shells of eggs or in your teeth. This actually gives physical strength to the cell walls that keep the plant upright and resilient. It also helps with the pollination and water absorption. Magnesium is a seed germination, helps with seed germination. So once that seeds are starting to develop, and also sulfur, which helps in disease control and seed formation, which would be inside the fruit. So these are all basic, real, most fertilizers, you're gonna see those 3 different numbers, what type of number that you need for each of these plants and such. But we can talk about fertilizing in just a second.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can get some planting going on
Yeah.
here.
I have a container here. We have what we're given by dear Grace Seibert Lark, one of our great farm teachers, gave us this wonderful planter, empty planter that we have now filled with soil. We're going to try to mimic and mirror what is happening in the garden bed in a container. Some of you in an apartment or with a porch, if that, or a stoop in Brooklyn, you might not have as much space as we are fortunate to have here at the farm or someone at a home garden. This has holes at the bottom to allow for drainage, okay? This soil mix from the JF Price in Weymouth, as I mentioned last week at our Zoom Live about building a garden bed, is a wonderful mix of loam and compost. So again, this is trying to mirror and mimic what is in the garden bed, because with this determinate tomato, that's not going to go as high or as far as the indeterminates, though it will have vigor. This determinate that we're going to transplant into here should do well in this soil. When we talk about fertilizers, we'll talk about when and how to add those. But just a basic container, it can get heavy, but it will stand and be there, be able to handle any of the elements and winds that are out there. So I filled it almost to the rim right here. It's a nice mix of the soil and compost that I mentioned. The determinate that she has, a Mountain Princess, which has been in the greenhouse and has been gently hardened off, is seeded right into, from its row tray, seeded right into a little peat pot, cardboard paper pot. And you can even see on the outside, may I share and show, aside I work at a distance, some of the root structures have already emerged from the outside of this wonderful little peat pot. It's protecting the roots. It also makes it less likely for us to upset any of the roots. All right, we're trying to make sure that this transplant here, and it gives us a chance to thank again all the doctors on the front line doing work and transplanting and careful doctor work that they're doing. We're trying to do a little bit of doctor work here and not mess with the root system. We could be causing a plant some stress. We don't want to cause them some stress. We want them to nicely be happily grown here, and then they continue their growth in a bigger, larger space. I no longer wear my favorite sneakers from when I was 10. My feet have grown and I needed bigger shoes. This plant needs a bigger space to grow.
So just to let you know, see how it's falling apart? It's because you really should soak your plants, your transplants, prior to planting them. One, you're making sure that that moisture is in there, so it helps with the shock value of replanting into something else.
Right.
It also starts to help deteriorate this a little bit so that the roots have a better way to get out. If you put that in all dry and hard and go to water, this is going to be absorbing, but the soil itself is still going to be contained in there and be dry.
Yeah, this soaks up a lot of water here.
Sometimes people tell you to peel those off. Generally, if you start to peel off the little tiny tender roots, you're going to put this in shock, and it's going to take another week or so before it comes back to life.
And a great videographer here, Jeswick Phillips, who has set up all these Facebook Lives and all these Zooms and doing such great work, making sure we have the ability to bring you information, can show you a detail of the root system right in there attached to that little peat on the outside. Thank you, Janice, for not only being an outreach coordinator and a compost queen, but a wonderful organizer of all these videos. So, creating a nice spot in here. I want to try to be level with the stem as to where it is at the top of the soil right now.
Well, actually, I would
No.
do it differently.
Okay, so we can do a second one.
Okay.
I want to try to do it even there. And also, what do you feel about these two leaves that do not look like the others?
I take them off.
Some of these things are not like the others. Take them off. There's the cotyledons, yes?
Yeah. So these are the leaves that helped it start its life. But now that the true leaves are here, then they're not really being used. The other thing, if you look at the plant structure, you're going to notice that tomatoes' stems are super hairy, right? So the whole idea of planting a tomato is plant it as deep as you can, right up to those true leaves is how you can do it. Some people even plant it this way because each one of those hairs has the potential to turn into a root. And more roots means more food, means more vigorousness, and stability too. So when I plant, I usually take off those two bottom leaves, and I'll plant it right up to the top, as deep as I can, and encourage those little root hairs to start to grow and spread out. And again, I wouldn't pull all this up because of all the baby.
And here's another container that Curry Hardware has supplied when we've done a tomato workshop through Cohane Funeral Home, Plant Grow Share. We're going to try to do that again virtually, we hope, online. See ya, Jack. And it's got holes at the bottom, just a basic 5-gallon bucket. Not ideal, not a farm row, like those wonderful fancy farmers who have lots of farm rows. But we have a nice bucket container right here. So Sally, go ahead. Same soil material right in there. Let me know if you want some more soil.
So a good soil, I should be able to just plunge my hand in. So I'm going to put mine really deep. In fact, when I'm at home, I dig a well. Mine goes down below the soil level. I dig a well and put it into my nice composted area. So when I water it, it goes down around the roots and it soaks it. Because one of the other things that's really necessary for proper tomato growth is proper watering. And that has a lot to do with, one, the temperature, and two, the stage that the tomato plant is growing. So I make mine more like a well so that the water can be concentrated when it does come in.
And collected down there, yeah.
Yeah, and it holds it into there.
And what about a nice Herbert Watson tomato cage from the 1950s?
Right, so because these are going to be bushy, they're not going to need a stake. You could use a little stake, I guess, if that's what you have, that's cool. But because they're going to be on your patio, your porch, or whatever, and they're going to be bushy, it's kind of nice to have the appropriate size.
You can imagine right there.
That one's going to go around it. Like
Yeah, but
it should be taller, obviously.
a little taller because it will get bushy.
Yeah, we're not going to stake those.
And there's a little, we'll talk about our tyings and our rags and our bed sheets as we get to the ground surface. So right there. Now, we haven't watered yet because we want to share our watering with all our transplants. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, water is essential, obviously. And there is a difference between water that's rainwater and the water from your tap. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, in the best of all worlds, you guys have a rain barrel at home where you collect your water. And the primary reason for that is because there's chemicals in our water. So chlorine, fluorine, all of these other additives that they put into our water supply to keep us healthy is not very good for the plants. It actually interferes with some of the absorption of vitamins and such. If you do have a hose and you want to fill something with a big bucket before you use it, that chlorine and that fluorine will eventually evaporate off and when it's outside in the sun, just like in a swimming pool kind of a thing. So then that water is a little bit more healthy. But most of us, let's face it, we're going to grab our hose and we're going to water the water.
Now, we do have a watering can, and you and I are going to demonstrate some careful watering because, like I talked about in the greenhouse of the controlled environment, and Jasmine Callahan doing an amazing job of overseeing these 30 to 40,000 seedlings. She's got to think about how am I best going to water? How am I best going to watch the growth of this teeny tiny seedling? All her little babies right there as they grow up. And ideally, which part of the plant needs the most part of the water? Which part is going to really drink up and enjoy that water? Not so much the leaves, who could be affected by mold or mildew, but the root system. So with our watering can, I can carefully get right to the root system. This is rainwater that we collected through our rain barrel system. Thank you, Brian, for building that. And Sally, what do you talk about this liquid fertilizer? People love, perhaps some people love to add a fertilizer. And there are synthetic fertilizers that we do not use here at the farm. We're an organic farm, but there are some healthy, age-old fertilizers that we can add to our water that would help our plants, especially as we transplant them.
Right. So if I was to do this at home, I would have soaked these plants in this diluted fertilizer. So now it's not only in the soil, but it's also in the little cardboard.
Yeah, little peat pots. Yep.
So that sort of thing is there again, giving it nutrients. This is a very mild one. This is a 2-4-1. So it's a very general, generic, kind of easy. It doesn't have a high numbers of nitrogen or anything else. So you want to promote leaf and stem growth, but you don't want to burn the soil, particularly with a baby, burn the plants. With baby plants, they don't have the ability to absorb and take everything. It's just like if you had a kid at home, you don't give them things that they can't digest yet, right? So with baby plants like this, you know, a nice starter fertilizer is great, gives them that little, little nourishment. If you have little baby seedlings at home, though, and I know I had a lot of people ask me about questions. I've just started my seeds and they're this big. Don't fertilize those. They don't have the root system yet to be able to absorb it. You'll probably just toxify them. So when they're about ready to plant, that's when you start to fertilize.
Because you're moving it from one place to another.
Right,
and
you're
they had the
getting
ability.
everything, that little send-off into its new soil and place.
And this, of course, is available. I know you're asking at store.hollyhillfarm.org. Is all kinds of Neptune's Harvest products from Gloucester up there in the North Shore. We're waiting for Scituate, Hingham, and Cohasset to develop some byproducts of the fishing industry. And in the meanwhile, I'm just going to add maybe a tablespoon to the watering can. It's about a cup per gallon of the fish fertilizer before watering.
And it does stink. Just want to let you know.
It does have a smell to it. Yes, fish do smell.
It's like fish.
And I can think back to what I had learned about Native Americans burying an entire set of fish bones along with their plantings, or Three Sisters planting, or whatever else they were growing, and are still growing today. So it's not just historical, it's current, and it's still happening.
There's 500 different nutrients in fish for soil. Now, if you see what Johnny's doing, he's watering the soil, not the leaves. And the reason why is, one, obviously you want the water at the roots, but when water gets on the leaves, it does two things. One, if it's a bright, hot, sunny day and you're watering and you're just like spraying the hose, those little droplets of water are going to act like a magnifying glass and they're going to burn your leaves. Okay. The other thing is that when you randomly just water whatever, it doesn't have a chance to dry off sometimes, depending on the weather, depending on the evening or the daytime, and that's going to set you up for plant disease. So the idea is to keep your leaves dry. They don't need the water. They'll make their own moisture and send it up there when they're making their chlorophyll and stuff. So most people, if they're smart, I guess, will either set up something like a soaker hose that they can turn on low.
That will go just to the roots.
Right, or attach it to a rain barrel so it just really soaks through. The other thing about planting and watering is you want to water it deep because you're basically showing the roots where they need to go. They're not going to hang out. If you only water it an inch deep, the roots are all going to hang up here. You want them deep. So the deeper that water goes, again, that's one of the reasons I kind of do a well around mine. I want it in, I want it full, and you want it at least get 6 or 8 inches deep in water. And that will take you some time to water. It's not a casual, just get out there and look at the topsoil. Stick your finger in it and it's dry. It's dry. So water, you don't have to water every day. Once a plant starts to go, maybe depending on the weather, maybe 3 times a week, preferably in the morning so that it has time to evaporate the water that's on it, on the leaves that can get on it and such. And give it that morning little cup of coffee so that it can say, hey, I got my water, I got my vitamins, and now I'm going to start to grow today.
And what I'm pleased to see is that the soil is really nicely soaking up that water. It's a good drainage quality in there, and we'll see more of that as we move to our garden bed.
All right, just a little time check. So it's we're at 40 minutes of our hour.
Wonderful.
So
And Janice is able to read questions. We are available at John@Holly Hill Farm, JON@hollyhillfarm.org to send those questions as follow-ups. Is there a survey again this week, Janice?
Maybe.
it went out in the constant contact
Out of the
today.
constant contact, if you'd like to make sure to receive our emails, we don't do anything else with your emails. We do not sell it to the wonderful GBH or anybody else, but we have your emails and we can send you a weekly newsletter. And that happens on Thursday mornings with the opportunity to buy produce as it's available, and to then, as I mentioned, to buy plants and to find out what else is happening on the farm. What's happening next week? What will I be discussing? Who will I have the pleasure of working with next week? So this is being developed. We're working on it. We got Facebook Live on Wednesdays. That's informational about what's happening on the farm. And then Thursday, these Zoom workshops live. Thank you, Lydia. They're live, are able to provide a little bit more in-depth perspective and understanding of aspects of planting and growing. So
And-
please stay tuned and continue to follow us. Here's our garden bed, Sally. Nice big garden bed. Can I put 8 to 10 to 12 tomatoes in here? Because I love tomato plants.
I know, but they need space. They need space. The larger
Social
tomato-
distancing they need.
Yeah, they need social distance. Actually, they do. So the larger plants, particularly the big viney ones and all that sort of thing, they need about 3 feet apart. And the main reason for that is not so much that they're going to compete for the nutrients in the soil or the water. You want to give tomato plants lots of air space. Lots of space around air. Again, it helps to keep the leaves and the stems and the flowers from getting infected with other kind of bacteria and molds and fungus. So the more air space that they have, the less likely they're going to contaminate each other if one of them does come out with a disease. Now the smaller plants, if I was to plant the smaller ones that are only going to be a bush, I might be able to put 4 or 6 in here because they're not going to be these big wide crazy ones.
Wide and
And
tall.
those are about 2 feet apart. I actually at home I grow 8 different varieties and I plant them all next to each other.
Yeah, 27
I
more.
don't do anything that I'm telling you what I'm supposed to do. And I plant them in the same place every year.
You enrich that soil.
right,
You
right,
enrich
right.
that soil.
But I'm also very keen on checking out my tomato plants. Every morning I go out there and look for critters. I look for disease. I look for problem areas so that I can nip it in the bud before it starts to develop. Something might tell me that I'm nutrient deficient, and I'll tell you a little bit about that too. So there's lots of things that you need to do, but about planting a space, plant them deep, and give them some place to spread.
So not only is this deep, and not only has this bed been enriched and had the leaves covering it to protect the soil from any type of runoff, we also have some wonderful homemade Holly Hill Farm. Thank you, Aaron and Janice and James. Compost here that we can add to our whole. So beautiful, rich, healthy compost. In addition to all the microbial life that's already in here, we can add this wonderful sifted compost. Thank you, Annie. Sifted right into here, and that will just mix in and give support to the tomato plant as it gets set to have its next step journey. Cheers to the graduates who are having to graduate online or via remote. Here, this tomato plant's going to graduate into the ground. Sally, should I try? Yeah.
Yep, give it a little pat.
Okay.
What
Solid
kind?
root system.
What kind of tomato is that?
It is a wonderful mystery that we have, an indeterminate. So when the farmers sow lots of tomato seeds and seedlings, they pot up the anticipated amount to sell. Sometimes there are bound to be some extras. We've got a wonderful extra. It's hardy. It's been hardened off outside, meaning it's gotten used to the elements, that dipping down into the low 50s or below. And we feel it's ready and hardy and healthy to get established into the ground.
And this
Good
was
solid root system right there. Those roots, I'm being very gentle with them. No teasing of these roots. Sometimes my mother used to say, tease the roots out of a pot. That's a plant that might have traveled from wonderful Florida or marvelous Canada, and those roots are really tight, and you could tease those
They're
a little
root
bit.
bound, right?
Root bound. I'm not going to tease these.
Right.
No teasing.
So you notice how easy that fell out into his hand, and that's primarily because it's been watered ahead of time.
Yeah.
When it dries up, it gets really hard and such. So like you should be able to just tip it up, sometimes give it a pat, a squeeze, and then
Can I do the well here too?
you can do well there. I think it helps to direct the water right down close to the plant instead of having it directed.
Well, all right.
All right. So this
Well,
kind
all
of
right.
plant is great. You could use a cage, or you could use one of the big stakes and tie it up as you go. You
Yeah, we've got a nice.
Yeah,
My grandpa used to use ragged
Right.
bed sheets. We got a little tomato
Yeah,
twine
you
of
can do
sorts.
fancy, you could do bread ties, you can do anything that's going to tie it. And you notice how he's putting it in. Put it in when you plant. Don't put it in 2 weeks later.
And then you can
because-
tell the plant, this is where you're headed.
Go that way. Go
Up.
that,
Head up.
because that's going to need to be tied up eventually. It doesn't necessarily need to be tied today. If we were expecting high winds or something tonight. But I always put my cages in place, and I also put my stakes in place. Actually, I put them in before my plants, just so I don't hit any of those little baby roots.
That's next week's Zoom workshop. How to plant a stake. How to place your pole into the ground before it plants. Just kidding. Sally, we have another room here. We can do another one spaced out. We talked about 7 months. These tomato plants, we hope, are in the ground producing fruit, growing into nice big ones there. Farmers like to measure 18 inches or so. That's 1.5 feet. My hand span, which I carry around with me at all times, is 9 inches. Last I checked. It's been that way for the last 10, 15 years. So a 9-incher and a 9-incher make 18. That's my approximate distance there. I can get a ruler and be precise. I'm going to estimate here 18 inches. Again, create my hole, grab a little compost that we've made here, and make sure to add that in.
No,
Janice is checking chat room questions and anything else if you want to do to follow up.
so as this starts to grow and it starts to really establish itself and it starts to continue to grow, a lot of people ask me, what do we do with the leaves and such on the leaf? So I think once the plant is really established, you can start stripping off some of the bottom leaves. They're usually brown and curly. You can start stripping off and pinching what we call the suckers, which are the in between the main branches, because they're just going to take nutrients and they're probably not going to really produce many tomatoes for you. So you can continue to do that and continue to fertilize. Now the fertilization should go on once the plants get established, either once a week or once every other week. And you can probably tell by how green your leaves are or whether it looks wilting. Don't over fertilize. You've got all that beautiful compost in there that's helping things. And by the way, fertilization can be granular. It can be something that's a concentrate that you mix with water, like Johnny did. It could be long lasting, giving it out like vitamins when you have to take your vitamins and they give it out slowly. All different kinds. And you can get organic pelletized and that sort of thing as well. So there's fertilizer in all different forms. And most of them are made for tomatoes. They'll say tomatoes on it. Now something else I'm going to give Johnny is something that complements growing everywhere that we do on here. This is called companion planting. Companion planting actually serves for 3 different reasons. One, it makes use of more space in your garden. You can plant certain plants together that like to be together, and you get more volume out of your garden that way. I do at home when I've had my garlic, I plant my carrot seeds and my beet seeds in between my garlic after it's already come up, so that when I pull my garlic, I have crops already growing. Now, in the case of tomato plants, they have their favorites. One of the best ones is marigolds, and this is what he's planting here. And the reason why marigolds put off an odor that most insects don't like. And also in its roots put out a chemical that kills nematodes, which are little microscopic worms that live in the soil that can do damage to the plant. So it increases the nutrients in the soil by actually helping keep water and such around the plants. So it's actually sharing some of the water and the nutrients, but they kind of add as a symbiosis. Again, they're helping each other. They help to attract pollinators. If you have a tomato plant, it has to be pollinated, right? The tomatoes that you get in the supermarket are usually grown in a greenhouse, and they have to be hand fertilized. And it's
Excuse me,
also-
We
not
love to have our
fertilized.
pollinators here.
Pollinated, hand pollinated.
And
yeah,
pollinated.
they have
Yeah.
to hand
Yeah.
pollinate.
And we
And-
love our pollinators that visit the farm and might visit your yard. They love the wildflowers that are out. They love the natural grass that you're growing and on parklands and spaces. I actually see a little bit of flower growth right here that I'm going to pinch off because I want this plant to get bigger before it starts making flowers.
Right. So it's already going to seed. So
Yeah.
good companions. So you can look this up anywhere, but companion plants, good companion plants for different reasons for tomato plants. Borage, chives, marigolds, nasturtium, basil, calendula, carrots, peppers, garlic. Let's see what else I got. Cilantro, marjoram, rosemary. So they can either act as something that dispels the insects, attracts the insects, changes the soil chemistry so they're helping each other, like beans and such can help the plants grow because they fix nitrogen and stuff. So there's different plants that will grow. Now there's plants you absolutely don't want to grow near your tomatoes. And this has a little bit to do with plant rotation too. So you don't want to be growing any of the brassicas, which are like broccoli, cabbage, kohlrabi. And you don't want to grow like corn near it either because they share in some of the same pests, like the tomato hornworm is very similar to the caterpillar that attacks corn as well. So you don't want those, and you don't want to plant anywhere near potatoes because potatoes share some of the same viruses that tomatoes do.
Even though they rhyme.
And that's one of the reasons why with crop rotation, you don't want to plant your tomato where potatoes grew, because if potatoes have that virus, they stay in the ground, and some of their stuff stays in the ground, and so that particular virus might be in the ground. So that's a little bit about plant rotation.
This is a
And-
wonderful screenshot right here of 32 companion plantings. And Janice is focused steadily on that. This is a wonderful list that she has provided for us. Another wonderful book in our time of isolation to read. Carrots Love Tomatoes. Great title about companion planting and what plants can go with each other or follow one another. Soil Mates. Get your soil test, know your soil, learn about soil, add compost to it.
So just to make a little reference, because we've been talking about plant disease, and that's one of our biggest sadnesses when you go out and find out that everything's, turning brown and curling and stuff. Some of the diseases are mostly airborne. Some of them are soil borne. Some of them insects and animals bring in. I'm just going to list a few of them. I do reference, there's a great illustration, Better Homes and Garden has it on tomato plant diseases, have beautiful illustrations to show you what the heck is going on with my plant. So there's blossom drop, which you've got these blossoms and all of a sudden they fall off. That's usually a heat extreme. What happens, plants will protect themselves by not putting energy into making their blossoms if there are extreme changes in weather or hot. Like if we had a week of 100-degree weather, it might lose its blossoms. So, and with that kind of temperature change, about protecting the tomato, maybe you can put in a little shade or something. It's really hard to deal with big temperature changes. But again, if this part of the plant is healthy, then it will continue to grow after the temperature resumes normal. There's end rot, which is when you got this beautiful tomato and there's this black thing that's growing on the bottom of it. It's really disappointing because you're like waiting for it to ripen. And end rot is primarily caused by a calcium deficiency. And again, calcium helps with absorption of water and a lot of the uptake of the nutrients and regulates the water absorption. So basically it's rotting from the inside out. There's early blight, which might come within a couple of months or a couple of weeks here.
Airborne, as you said.
That one actually is soil-borne.
Soil-borne.
That's
Right.
a soil-borne thing. And what helps to keep that from happening, again, is that watering situation where you don't want water hanging out on the leaves in a hot, moist day, and this little breeding pond on the leaves and such. But it's how you water. If you're watering straight into the soil hard, it's going to splash up that soil. It's going to splash up that virus. So what you do is you put mulch around your plants, right? Mulch is great to keep weeds down, but it really is to keep moisture in the ground and stop the evaporation. and also to prevent these soil-borne viruses from splashing up on the underside of your plants. Sometimes if you catch it early enough, you start to see some of those leaves starting to go. You can peel off all those leaves and do not compost them. If you compost, I don't compost any of my tomato plants, even the best of one. I never compost my tomato plants, just on the idea that they could still have some virus in them, and then I'm putting them in my compost. Then there's late blight, which is the one that comes near the end of the season. That's when the weather's starting to get a little cooler and water doesn't evaporate as easy. And that's usually airborne. That comes in, and that's usually a problem with big production places. Or if you bought a plant that happens to have it in its soil or in its the plant's litter, because you bought it from some wherever place that had it and they're just still selling them. So you can actually bring it into your garden. There's a mosaic virus that's really easy transmittable. And that is really from touching this stuff. Potatoes have it, squash has it, and tobacco smokers. If you have the tobacco on your hands, don't touch your tomato plants because that can share the same virus thing. And the last one we like to keep is those caterpillars, those horned caterpillars. And again, those are, take them off your plant if you see them. Try not to have anything that's going to attract them. And also plant complementary plants, companion plants like bronze fennel, which attracts a certain parasitic wasp. And that wasp will attack those caterpillars for you.
And
So-
excuse me, would you plant the bronze fennel right in this garden here, or does it just need to be somewhere in your garden nearby?
I usually put it right next to my plants, just like I would my, you know, I want them here so that they can check out my garden for me.
Okay.
I want nature to do the work for me, right? So that's why I put in the plants that will help each other grow, but also keep the insects off. Now, I know there were a few questions. I just want to ask one right now because I had it written down. Mary Ann Gibbons asked, what are the best practices for avoiding issues with blight and mold? And so the best practices include choosing the blight-resistant tomatoes, right? Not the heirloom ones. They tend to get blight. So choose your tomatoes that have the resistancy in them. The spacing again, airflow, keeping the air flowing around it so things dry off. You're watering long, deep soaks. Don't overwater, but also just keep it nice and moist. And as the summer progresses, it gets hotter, you might have to water every morning. And then again, mulch, 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 mulch. Mulch can be grass clippings, can be newspaper, can be straw, can be more compost. A lot of times I just use
Roll up coffee bag.
my leaf litter, my leaf compost. I still put on around there. It's protecting what the soil so it doesn't splash up. So early blight, the signs of the lower leaves are yellowing and such, and they're brown and they're weak and all that kind of stuff. So pull those out. If you start to get late blight, it's kind of like the end of the thing because late blight affects the entire plant. It just destroys it. So you're best actually to pull the plant out and get rid of it.
And don't compost it.
And don't compost that as well. Unfortunately, late blight hopefully is rare because it's really more for industrial kind of thing. But sometimes when people get plants from somewhere else that might have had it, they're having do it. Let's see. Any other things that I need to ask? Beneficial sprays.
Well, why
There
don't
are
we
some sprays and stuff that you can get to help.
open it up to live Q&A? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question. If you're not comfortable with that, you can put it in the chat.
You can also follow up with us, John at hollyhillfarm.org. It's a wonderful new Gmail address that I have, jon@hollyhillfarm.org. We're available here at the farm to help answer questions as you continue to plant and think about it. As questions are ruminating and thinking up in your mind, this is the education garden. And we have loads and loads of school kids here in a normal year. They're not here this year. And we miss them. We're trying to plant and teach them through the World Wide Web and through videos. But if you're here and the parking lot has space for you to come in to safely be at a distance, see the animals, you don't need to feed them, don't need to pet them too much, but you can visit with them. Come see the education garden. See how the variety and diversity of crops we have here mirrors what the farmers are doing. A Three Sisters garden is going to go down in a wonderful long bed, enriched hilly bed at the bottom of the garden. There's hugelkultur. There'll be a demonstration beehive. Garlic is up from last fall. Flowering arugula. Peas climbing a fence. The tomatoes we talked about today. The raised bed we built last week. We have more to teach and more to share with you. So this is a wonderful farm that you are able to visit, sometimes virtually and sometimes in person.
So are there any other questions? Miss
I see
Nolan?
someone shaking their head no. Sandy's
right.
shaking her head. That means we did a good job,
So we
hopefully.
covered everything?
Did we cover everything?
Until it goes, and they're like, oh, one more question.
We will see you in mid-August for Cooking with Tomatoes.
Caprese.
That grows right here.
I do have one about preserving your tomatoes. So, besides, we can eat them when they're fresh and stuff. And besides making sauce, how else can you keep them for that?
September Zoom, Sally?
Yeah, sure.
Nice. Glass of wine. Sounds
Awesome.
good. Friends and neighbors, thanks for joining in with us today.
Thank you, guys.
Special thanks to Liza doing the back end work, Cindy, our director, Janice doing the video work, Lydia giving us the Zoom. Great to have you here at the farm, albeit virtually.